Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So I'm going to put the proofs on the screen. The points to prove my point. So in Genesis 2, it talks about how the Garden of Eden was formed, and it talks about how man was formed. So we see that trees are symbolic, right? There isn't a tree called the tree of life. Now, there are things about trees that are important, right? There's apple trees and what have you that give people something in a way that shows us that there's a greater design to things. And people have often cited the literal fruit of literal trees as proof of God. But trees are kind of like clouds, right? They're groupings of something, right? There's roots, okay? There's fruit. There's leaves, right? The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nation, the Bible says. The root and offspring of David, right? The king who was chosen as a spiritual being, right? His flesh wasn't chosen. Again, the flesh means nothing. You get the DNA of David all day and try to make something, but it's just an abomination, because without the spirit, it's just dust, right? God breathes the spirit of life into man. So we look at the trees, right? The fig tree, okay? The figs can either stand for something good or something evil. The barren fig tree, right? The parable where Jesus rebukes it, it dies. The stars are compared to figs, okay, that drop from a fig tree. In Revelation, when the stars fall, the stars are compared to angels. So whether you're worshiping angels or demons, your spirit grouping. So the tree of life has to do with the water and the breath. And the tree of knowledge is just mere science without the Spirit of God, without the divine order. And there's other trees that are pleasing. So it's like if we were in Africa, right? And we'll just use one race to keep it simple so racists don't get confused. Okay, so they're all black people in different shades and shapes and sizes. And some of them, they're pleasing their different ways. Some are attractive women, with long hair. Maybe some have short hair. Maybe some are tall. Some are short. Okay, they have different features that make them attractive, different cultures, different blessings. Some are good at art. Some are good at cooking or whatever. Okay, these are different trees, but they have to be in God's order, right? His grouping of things were grouped in the garden. And the tree of knowledge is a trap for anybody who's stupid enough to try to leverage knowledge, changing, the lion pit of the scribes is talked about in Jeremiah 8:8 to try to be in charge. And there's a snake in that tree, just like Nebuchadnezzar is described as a snake. Leviathan, that gliding serpent in Isaiah. And in Revelation, it says the ancient serpent, the devil. Well, the devil's seeking the snake to cheat, and the snake is also a phallic symbol. So, when you have a marriage, for example, let's say you're a black guy married to a white woman, or a white guy married to a black woman. If you're in the Spirit of God, which cannot be achieved after my flesh dies, mind you, then your children are from the tree of life, and they're the offspring of the righteous. They're mighty, they're upright, what have you. Okay, if they maintain being in the Spirit, if they're actually your spirit offspring, those who obey the commands of God are my family, is what Christ says in the New Testament. So you see that there's no other way that this could be. So far, most people would agree. When I talk about the location of the Garden of Eden and why it is that's when you're going to get a lot of racist people, a lot of crypto this and that racist, a lot of Jews who are racist, a lot of gay people who don't want people to know that heterosexuality from God, when it comes from God, is divine. You get a lot of haters, a lot of naysayers, a lot of Satan's little helpers. Now, again, I've said this many times. The LGBT community, they respect me for it. I said, look, straight people who are not having, generally speaking, they respect me for it. Straight people who are not having divine relations are just as sexually immoral as gay people. You've got to give up your sexual inclinations that are immoral, regardless of what they are, to come into the divine state of being. And if you choose not to be divine, you shouldn't try to bring other people down with you. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So we have the trees, we have the man being made from the dust, and we have the water of life. This is pretty easy. Where it gets a bit confusing is the cryptograms, right? Leb Kamai, right? A cryptogram for Babylon. Rahab, a cryptogram for Egypt. Okay? Where it gets confusing is the cryptograms, which are the names, right? The name of God, as they say, the Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name. So what is this warrior, this martial art Garden of Eden that it's talking about, and why is it not a literal place in Mesopotamia, in Chaldea, in Babylon, where Abraham's from? Why not? Well, first of all, Noah is before Abraham. And the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve are before Noah and Abraham. So why would the Garden of Eden be in a place that Noah was not? That Adam was not. It's not. Okay? Now, who wrote the Bible? Who are the scribes that are telling the story? Like propagandists. Those are the main people you would suspect. You go to Isaiah 1, suspect for falsehood. And who else has power in the world? So if they're rich, suspect them. If they wrote the story, suspect them. If they always crucified and stoned the prophets, be suspicious of their version. Ask questions. If they say, hey, no, I'm just this type of flesh-based person, just believe me, don't believe them. God doesn't work that way. If they haven't established it in righteous acts, you know them by their fruit. By their fruit. Is it from righteousness, right? The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life. Out of the mouth of the righteous comes the fruit of wisdom. The hawk spreads its wings to the south by the wisdom of God. Is it Horus? Who did the Egyptians say was Horus? Are they depicting someone that looks like, Bill Gates? Someone looks like Chris Tucker? Some Chris Rock? Who are they depicting? What is he a god of? He's a god of war, right? The Lord is a warrior. The heavenly warrior defeats the beast. They're depicting an African martial artist. Why? Why? Okay, why is a bit tricky. God made man in his image from the dust in Africa. Okay. Now, we have to then say, well, science points to that as far as anyone knows. Are they wrong? There's no evidence that they're wrong. In fact, the Middle East has been a desert for a long time. Africa's desertification process. So we look at the actual timeline that the Bible presents, as I've heard people say that they argue, not me, they're arguing that magically, the earth magically is like 6,000 years old, 8,000. They say things like this. Not true. Because it's figurative. We look at the cryptogram argument. Eden, right? Daon, right? On being Ayunu Heliopolis. Okay, God, Ra is called center, Ra meaning God, and Ra in Hebrew means evil. And the Bible says the Jews have been calling good evil and evil good. Okay, he says, woe to you, right? The masses of them, right? Gog and Magog, the majority of them, right? Teaming up against Isaiah and Zechariah, who they killed, and on and on. Isaiah is said to be sawed in half, and on and on and on and on. Right? All these guys, Amos, Nahum, Micah, you name it. They're against the massism. Elijah versus the prophets of Baal. So it's the flesh versus the spirit. So add on. Joseph took Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the high priest of On. When Pharaoh said, that's going to be your wife, he accepted it. So we know that we have to interpret it some way. Okay, because there's a lot of ways to explain this. We know that the facts point to God creating man out of the dust in Africa, and the spirit is righteousness. The spirit isn't Jewish. The spirit is righteousness. The spirit isn't, white Christian or Ethiopian or anybody. It is specifically righteousness and justice. That's how God is known. He's not known by his Jewish characteristics or his black characteristics. He's known by righteousness. Now, how you know who Christ is? You know him by his fruits, right? And that includes the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. This gets trickier because we know that Eden is a play on words for add on or day on, day, right? The light, the sun in righteousness, Malachi, Psalms. And we go to Isaiah 28:17, and it says, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plume line. Hail will sweep away your refuge to lie, and water will overthrow your hiding place. So the way is the truth. And you know them by their fruit. And it's a garden with fruit. And they talk about the fruit of the womb. As we see the splitting of mankind. Now again, why would white or Jewish or LGBT people lie about things, about history and bones in a way that doesn't favor them? Their stated argument my whole life is that Africans were the greatest warriors, right? You look at how they tell the history of the world. Black people dominate Africa, right? They're fighting. Then we see the other people spill over. And after the other people spill over, in case you're like, no, that's not what happened. They left on their own. Okay, then why did Cush begot Nimrod? Why does Nahum say that Cush and Egypt have a boundless strength? Because they're the greatest warrior force. And it says in Genesis 2 that the Garden of Eden fed Cush. And it had 4 headwaters, right? It breaks into 4 different rivers, different waters. And one of them is the Sea of People of Cush. It's like Cain and Abel, right? So there's this kind of race. They're even called a race. Again, I'm not a racial supremacist, I'm a moral supremacist. There's a race to see who is going to be a greatest natural martial artist. And at some point, whites and Jews threw in the towel. Why? Because they started using, armor. They started using heavy shields. They started using catapults and things like this. They didn't fight with these guys in the way that in Egypt it was proven. For example, now bear with me. Some of you you're going to get why I'm right here, because it's a bit tricky here. Because in the story, Aaron and Moses throw their staffs on the ground. They throw their staffs on the ground, their sticks, right? And in Egypt, they did Tatib, being straightforward and honest through the use of a stick. And Samson struck down people with a jawbone. And Jonathan with his sword and spear and what have you, he's striking down Philistines. Okay? So the main way you prove it, like the sword of Scripture, is with martial arts. David versus Goliath, single combat. It's in the most potent form, okay, with hand-to-hand combat, man-to-man, heart-to-heart. You see what I'm saying? So the Garden of Eden, okay, when the waters were given, right, the parable of the 10 minas, the parable of the bags of gold, Cush went beyond these other guys, okay? And just like it says where Jesus went to the sick and not to the healthy, he goes to the Jews and not to the Cushites. And it's not that simple, mind you. It's not as simple as he went there because of their race. Because in the story, keep in mind it's just a story, some of the Jews received him, right? The 12 disciples. Now they're doubting him, say, you men of little faith. But Cush was a mighty warrior before the Lord of great faith. So Nimrod. Nimrod was a mighty warrior for the Lord of great faith. So Nimrod went beyond the 12 disciples. You see what's happened there? It gets confusing. Okay? We have to interpret it within the boundaries of righteousness and justice. We have to consider Mandela and Martin Luther King. We have to consider the lack of Jewish and white righteous men. George Washington is a propaganda figure who didn't die for what he believed. Martin Luther King, as far as anyone can tell, and we see other characteristics in him, is a righteous person that died for what he believed, that transcends everybody in a mostly white nation that is a Judeo-Christian culture. So where are the Jews that are equal or greater? Where's the white man? That's a fruit. That's a breadcrumb. It's part of the piece of bread. It's a fruit. It's a sign from God. We see that they fail to have people comparable to Mandela. They fail to have warriors comparable to Shaka Zulu. Using a musket is not being straightforward and honest through the use of a stick. It's simply blowing somebody away. And then in their churches, right, that are allowed in a world that's dominated by the devil, they talk about canon law. They talk about what? They talk about canon law. When they marshal things in their military, in a military state, it's called martial law. Canon law, martial law. And they're using guns. And the word gun starts with the word Jew. Strange, right? They talk about muscles, your guns, right? Now, the gun. Okay, so in the word gun, you have the word Jew, right? Jupiter and Juno, right? Jupiter and Juno, who are Zeus and Hera, they're equivalent, they're counterparts, what have you, in Roman mythology. Okay, and there's the Club of Rome, America has a Senate, it's Neo-Roman culture, there's all kinds of connections there, and people have written books about it, what have you. So we look at that, and we see that Juju means witchcraft. Okay, so they're using witchcraft. Now, why hasn't the West exposed it themselves? Well, you say, well, they worship the devil. Great. Okay. But you've got to see it in terms of who is closest to the Garden of Eden. Okay. The Garden of Eden is not a physical place. Okay. And when they made the Garden of Eden, they said they make it in the East, right? And they're not talking about the Far East. Okay. They're talking about where Africans overlap with Middle Asians, right? And there's some degree of Asian there too, what have you, okay? And that's why Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language. That's why in Revelation it says the nations of peoples, the multitudes and languages. And I made this video having not entirely prepared for it, which I often do. So you see the sincerity, you see the struggle, you see them trying to make it harder for me to speak. You have to drive around and repark and so on and so forth, okay? That's because they're Babylonian scum. You know them by them trying to sabotage me. Are they trying to help me? Where's everyone trying to help me? No one from any race has rallied and obeyed God through me. My parents are blameless. There's me. There's something to be said about my brothers. That's it. Okay? So, if the Garden of Eden was in the Middle East, how come there's not a single Middle Eastern person who's loyal to God? Because it wasn't. That's not their culture. It's somewhere else. It's in the spiritual realm. Now, the easiest way to understand this, it will lead us to the wordplay. And this is part of why I don't like the Bible. For me to prove this point to you in a way that's to your satisfaction, unless you're crazy, okay? If you're a Christian who's a fanatic Christian who believes that you need to look to the Bible like Protestants believe, for example, I have to then use the wordplay. We have to look at the names of the bodies of water, the rivers, the headwaters, and where they're going. Cush, C-U, Sh, Abraham, Alpha, B, Raham, Tribe B, they're trying to be something else. They're doing witchcraft like Jezebel and the followers of Baal and Asherah. She wasn't just said to be the queen of heaven. She pretended to be the queen of heaven, which is falsehood, which is illusion, which is psychology, which is chemistry, which is whatever technologies they have available through Nebo. Nebo and Baal, the enemies of God, among the other deities, the demon deities who cheat me out of my right to lead. Therefore, they're demons, they're devils, they're beasts, they're abominations. And the reproductive cycles are as well. So when we look at the names of the rivers in Egypt, in northern Egypt, which is called Lower Egypt because the Nile flows south to the north, right? It's flowing from the Garden of Eden. But the Garden of Eden, the simple answer is in the spiritual realm, and it was in Africa, in the spiritual realm. Okay? And it's flowing there. So when these people, nature said, if you want to go north, just make a boat, get on that boat, and the current, the natural current from God will take you there. Okay? That's how it was made. The river was like pointing that way. And the source of it, right? The White Nile and the Blue Nile, right? Ethiopia and, it's been a while, I want to say Uganda, right? It's in the middle of Africa. And say the Garden of Eden's in the middle. But in a sense, right? You got to realize, you have to interpret it in the boundaries of righteousness and justice, right? In a sense, it's in northern Egypt. Why? Because you've got to include the other people. Okay? Egypt's a major trade route. They're going to come in from the north. Right? If they're coming from the southern Mediterranean basin, southern Europe, if they're coming from the Middle East, if they're coming from the Far East, what have you, they're going to come through the north. So the place where they're kind of feeding the world. Now, this is also interesting. Now, some of you say, I don't buy it. Okay, show me a river that starts in the Middle East and goes all the way through Egypt and into Cush. It does not exist. And as it does not exist, a literal garden in that place does not exist. So where is it? You've got to realize that the people who wrote this story are trying to assign themselves importance. That's what arrogant people do. That's what Herod wanted them to do, what Caesar wanted them to do, Pilate wanted them to do, regardless of what group it is. If there's a tyrant and there's a religious story, they want to be the center of it. So it's the cult of the empire. The emperor is opposed to the cultures of God. So where is the Garden of Eden? It's in the spiritual realm by the hearts of the African nobility who established the throne in justice. What is the Bible? It is a cult counterfeit of the story of God as told in the oral traditions of Africans, and also to some degree, in the counterfeit stories in Egypt, which have counterfeited the oral tradition. Now the oral tradition, it's gone. You can't go, nobody, not in my family, not in another family. There is no complete story that's told from generation to generation. The story is told in nature. It's told through martial arts, okay? And Royal African Falcon martial arts. After I'm gone, the story will never be told accurately in a way that truly conveys the message again. People are cut off in more than one way. They won't have valid marriages. They won't be able to make love. They won't be able to love their families, on and on and on. They're the walking dead. They don't have the spirit of life. They don't have the life to connect to the source, which is the garden. Now, again, I don't care. Let's say for the sake of argument, the garden magic was literal, okay, and it was on Mars, and those green people saying it's on Mars and we're superior. I don't give a shit about that. Okay, I don't care. Because the throne is established in righteousness. Not whether you're from the land where the Garden of Eden is said to be. You see what I'm saying? So as we look at the story, and I've gone way over time now, I'm going to have to make a part 2. Once we get into the wordplay of the names, that's where it directly points to Africa. And I'm going to have to go dig up a map and I've done this before some years back, right, on my Mayat Order channel. But I didn't do that great of a job, but I did a good enough job for you to see, right, that it has to be that way. And at the end of the day, you know them by their fruit. The water of life, the root, an offspring of David, taking the water, going into the tree, bearing fruit. The whole process is an African martial art process. Hebrew is even an Afro-Asiatic language, right? Ham begot Cush, Cush begot Nimrod, Nimrod founded Babylon. The waters that fed Cush created Nimrod, and he surpassed every other group, and they never matched him. Now, this gets interesting, because you say, well, what about Samson? Well, first of all, do you look for the top warrior animal, for example, among cats or dogs? Or do you look leopard, lion, something more like that, right? So we see the African warrior shape goes beyond, okay? And at some point they had the same father, Noah, right? Ham, Shem, Japheth. And so they cultivated it more. They were prudent. Prudence is a key principle in Proverbs. They were diligent. They scrambled with the martial art principles to go beyond the other groups. So the kingdom of heaven was with Ham, Abraham. Okay, the kingdom of heaven was through black people, through certain black people, and black people are the most diverse of the races as the story goes. So, again, I'm going to go ahead and post this, even though I'm over time. I'm not even let me post it because it's like 25 minutes or wherever we're at now. But you see how these guys waved their magic wand. They fumed me. They didn't give me the things that I need. I need people to come together, scramble, and do the wordplay. All that. I don't need to do this all myself. I'm the king, right? Has helpers. It's not good for him to be alone. It says in the same chapter, I believe, Genesis 2, it's not good for him to be alone. Let me make him a suitable helper. So where's the helpers of the races? They weren't there. Instead, they were throwing me little bones and waving their magic wands so they could say, we have a superior presentation. In the Luciferian spirit, that's where they were. So when you black supremacists might say, well, brother, where were they? You're right. They were sabotaging the black man. That's where they were. But so were you.